do a quick video here about how to use accessories, and it's going to be very general how to use things. We can't spell stuff out exactly, give wiring diagrams, because there's so much variability in what you can do with the Beatbox with accessories and what can be installed. So I want to start here with, this is the amp. Here's the harness that you're going to have connected. I haven't, obviously this is sitting on a bench, so some things aren't going to be connected. The way that the amp is set up, if you don't use any of the accessory wires, and these are all the accessory wires, RCAs, there's some open butt splices, and then there's this little circuit board here. If you don't use any of these, the amp is set up to be in one of four configurations. The amp itself basically is 4 amplifiers in one. What I mean there is it can use different inputs and outputs and be configured all sorts of different ways. We've pre-configured it to have 4 different setups in it. One is Mercedes inputs, which is called high-level inputs. So post-amplification from Mercedes inputs into the amplifier, and 5 speaker output. The 5 speakers are left and right tweeter, left and right door, and subwoofer. So that's the default configuration if you use none of the accessory wires. There's another configuration, configuration 2, is high-level input from Mercedes. So that's post-Mercedes amplification, which isn't much amplification, but high-level inputs, then 7-channel output. So if you're in configuration 2, 7-channel output powers this for accessory speakers. We have it tuned for ARC 602 coaxial speakers. This board right here is a resistor pack. It's a resistor pack, so if you enable the rear speakers to be on and you don't have anything connected, it loads the amp because the amplifier likes to see load. So this resistor pack is here so that if you accidentally put it into configuration 2 or one of the other configurations using this wire, and if you had nothing hooked up to it, you might damage the amplifier. But if we hook up this resistor pack, and it's a pass-through resistor pack, it's very high, I think there are 40 ohm resistors in here. So once you have speakers hooked up, they basically do nothing. When there's no speakers hooked up, you keep the amplifier happy. So leave the resistor pack hooked up. So configuration 2 is 7 channels, which is left tweeter, right tweeter, left door, right door, subwoofer, and then accessory channels, which are tuned for an ARC 602 coaxial speaker. Configurations 3 and 4 are when you can use these RCA inputs. These are low-level inputs. So when it's configurations 3 or 4, it's not going to listen to the Mercedes inputs anymore. It's ignoring those, and it's only going to listen to audio you have coming through these RCAs as a 0 to 2 volt low-level input signal. Configuration 3 is 5-channel. Again, that's door, door, tweeter, tweeter, subwoofer. Configuration 4 is 7-channel. Door, door, tweeter, tweeter, subwoofer. And then accessory channels can be rear speakers, outdoor speakers, whatever you want. How do you change configurations? You change configurations by putting 12 volts on one or both of these wires that are connected to profile 1 and profile 2. These other ends of the wires are right here, these open butt splices. So if you have the amplifier turned on and nothing, no 12 volts on either of these 2 wires, the amplifier is in configuration 1, Mercedes input 5-channel. If you power the white wire, which is profile 1, we'll call it profile 2, if you put 12 volts on this wire, it goes to configuration 2, which is Mercedes input 7-channel. If you power just the yellow wire, just the blue wire, not the yellow wire, just the blue wire, it's configuration 3, which is Bluetooth input 5-channel. If you power both of these wires, it's configuration 4. So if both of these are powered when the amp is on, configuration 4, Bluetooth input, 7-channel output. That's how these configuration wires work. What's this yellow wire? This yellow wire is the same as this yellow wire. It's an amp trigger. When the amp is connected to power, but if you don't have the amp triggered, the amp doesn't turn on. It's not turned on waiting for music. There's nothing that's going to come out of the amp, nothing can go into the amp. The amp just has power connected to it, it's not on. When you apply 12 volts here using either the power port on the side of the driver's seat base or some other trigger, it turns the amp on. When you apply 12 volts here, it turns the amp on. If I apply 12 volts here, 12 volts will not come out here. If I apply 12 volts here, 12 volts will not come out here. While they are connected in parallel, they're connected in parallel via a circuit board, which is right here. And that circuit board has some diodes on it. So if I turn it on here, I'm not going to backfeed a power port. If I turn it on here, I'm not going to backfeed some trigger that's connected here. This is the trigger wire. This is how the amp turns on. Anytime there's 12 volts on this wire, the amp's going to turn on. Both of these can turn the amp on. Let's talk a little bit about alternate power sources for the amp. So you're normally going to have the amp powered, these two wires connected to Mercedes. If you want to have power from house batteries, you need a way to switch between power sources. This is just a little relay here. It's 250 amps, 12 volt DC. It's from iRhapsody. It came from Amazon. What's important about this relay, or any relay you choose for this, is that it's a single pole double throw. What a single pole double throw means: when the relay is not powered, it's connected here. When the relay is powered, it connects there. When I say when the relay is powered, when you have low current 12 volt and ground here, the relay switches sources. So if this wire goes to positive on the amp, then you have Mercedes power here and house power there. If you have a Mercedes power on your normally closed circuit, normally closed meaning when the relay is off, it's powered from Mercedes. When the relay is on, it's powered from another power source. Maybe that power source is the house batteries or something else. You can use a relay, anything you want. It doesn't have to be this exact relay. You just need some device that can switch power sources and can handle approximately 80 amps, which is the size of the fuse. So whatever you have it fused at, that's what the device needs to handle. Let's talk about Bluetooth receivers. A lot of different options for Bluetooth receivers. We've tested it with these JL Audio receivers. There's Bluetooth receivers from other companies. They're all a little different. This JL Audio receiver has RCAs, which you can plug directly in here. Then it's got a bunch of other wires. It's got a power wire. It's got a ground wire, and then it has this blue wire, which is trigger out. So when you apply power and ground, this device turns on. When it turns on, trigger out. So you could use this trigger out. Let's say you want to be 7-channel Bluetooth. If you apply 12 volts here, it's going to turn the amp on. If you apply 12 volts here and here, it's going to go to a 7-channel Bluetooth mode, which is configuration 4. So you could use the trigger out to basically connect it to all three of these. So when the Bluetooth receiver is on, it's going to switch the amp into being on. It's going to switch the amp to Bluetooth and 7-channel. If you have a relay, you turn the Bluetooth receiver on. Let's say when the Bluetooth receiver is on, you want to use house batteries. You could also use the trigger signal to switch the relay. Boom. We turn the Bluetooth receiver on, relay switches power sources. The amp turns on via the yellow wire. The amp goes to config 4 via these two wires. Let's say that we don't have a trigger out and we're switching the 12 volt source into this to turn it on and off. You just have a rocker switch maybe, and the rocker switch applies 12 volts to the Bluetooth receiver to turn it on. That rocker switch could also apply 12 volts to the relay to switch the relay, 12 volts to the trigger wire to turn the amp on, and then 12 volts to both of these wires to put the amp into config 4. That's how you can use this style Bluetooth receiver. This style Bluetooth receiver has an on-off button. So the trigger out has a remote in, which we're not going to use. The remote out, anytime this is on, the remote out is on. So the remote out wire, we have this constant powered through the red wire. So this guy is ready to go all the time. If somebody turns it on, when it turns on, the remote out is 12 volts. That's going to switch the relay. It's going to turn the amp on via the yellow wire. It's going to turn the amp into Bluetooth 7-channel configuration via these two wires, or Bluetooth 5-channel configuration via just the blue wire. So that's how you can use these style Bluetooth receivers. Here's another style Bluetooth receiver. This Bluetooth receiver doesn't have RCAs. It's got little headphone jacks. So this is auxiliary in, we don't care about that. Auxiliary out, or main out. Main out is what we need to somehow connect to the RCAs. You can get an RCA to headphone jack adapter that you can plug in here, then plug into the RCAs. This Bluetooth receiver has a power on. Power on, it's got a trigger out. You can use the trigger out to control the amp, the relay. Turn the amp on, turn the amp to different configurations. So you keep constant 12 volt power on this, and then when somebody turns it on, it's going to switch the amp, it's going to switch the relay. Hopefully, this kind of gives you an overview of why there's a lot of flexibility and we can't give exact instructions. Another really important thing to note, when you're using auxiliary sources and house power and chassis power, the grounds of your two 12 volt power sources must be joined together. If you have chassis power and the ground is floating from house power, and let's say that maybe you power your Bluetooth receiver from the house and the amp is referencing chassis ground, because the ground wire here is going to the chassis, the amp will have no idea what 12 volts means when 12 volt comes in to a trigger wire from a house battery when the grounds are not tied together. So you must tie the grounds together for the house and the chassis system if you're powering the amp from two different sources. If you're powering the amp only from one source, all of your controls must also be powered from that same source. Anytime you're using two different power sources, I cannot say this enough, tie your grounds together. The grounds must be tied together. For example, if you have a 48 volt power system in a Storyteller and you use a DC to DC converter to get 12 volts for the stereo, most DC to DC converters, or not most, but a lot of them have isolated outputs. Isolated outputs means you have power and ground coming in, power and ground coming out. They're not at the same ground potential. And even if you do that, you don't know if the house batteries are at the same ground potential as the output. So you need to take that 12 volt output and take the ground wire and tie it to the chassis so that the 12 volt out from your house batteries or the 12 volt out from your DC to DC converter from high voltage house batteries is at the exact same potential as the chassis, the same ground reference. We're not going to be able to answer specific questions. How do I use this very specific Bluetooth receiver? I have this thing and I want to do this crazy custom thing. Hopefully this sort of general video about how the triggers work and how the amp works is enough. And thanks.